Hey guys, want to thank everybody for tuning in to this afternoon with us. Today we want to talk about landlords' rights. Uh, with everything going on out there, we all know that there's a lot of craziness going on out there. There's been a lot of media about tenants, some good, most bad, and we wanted to try and maybe clear up some of the rights that we have as landlords, and that's why we got Toby Mathis involved with us with Anderson Advisors because he is an attorney, and this is a time where we really need to be thinking about doing things the right way so we don't get ourselves in trouble as landlords. That's the last thing that we want to do. And the actions that we take today out of getting frustrated could come to bite us tomorrow if we're not careful. That's kind of how I look at it. And so, with that being said, I'd like to introduce everybody to Toby Mathis. And Toby, let's get this going, and I'll let you get things started with where we're at and what you're thinking. Some of the things that we need to think about or directions we need to be going as landlords.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Steve, for having me. First off, I just want to let everybody know that feel free to answer or ask any questions. I don't know how you get them, Steve, but
yeah. If you got questions, please send them in. All the questions will be going to Angie, and then at the end we'll answer.
We'll go through them. Just because there's so much misinformation out there, like so many things that's going on in this the COVID-19 world, that there's just a lot of really bad information, and our press seems to be taking it upon themselves to dispense it in heaping amounts.
Yes.
Just so you guys know who I am an attorney, but I focus on investing, on investors and investing myself. I have over 150 single family residences nationwide, along with several apartment buildings and commercial properties like warehouses, and have some commercial buildings as well. Ranging from the East Coast all the way, I guess right now, Washington State and Nevada are as far west as we go. We got rid of California.
Good move.
I mean, you guys are going to have some California neighbors here pretty quick because they're gonna flee that state in droves.
Well, I hear that they're trying to pass some very crazy things over there. I just had a conversation with a property manager this morning, and he heard that they're trying to do some 10-year forgiveness thing for tenants. I mean, that's insane. Absolutely doesn't even make sense. But thank God.
Apparently, landlords don't have bills. You guys don't have mortgages, and we're the rich that they're supposed to be up against. Yeah, last time I checked, the government can't take like that. So. They have enough hard times passing these rent restriction laws. Hopefully we never see that in Nevada or in Texas. By the way, we have attorneys in both places. So we're up on the whole scheme and the whole thing that's going on nationwide, and we can kind of take it at a macro level and get it into a micro level. But at its core, we have these stay-at-home and shelter-in-place orders going on throughout the country. And as a result, the federal government didn't want you throwing people out on the street in the midst of a pandemic. And so there was restrictions on the ability to evict. And a lot of people made that into a belief that somehow they didn't have to pay. And so like Texas, for example, you're not able to do the self-help. You're not able to get rid of a possession. You're not able to evict until certain points. I think May 18th is the right to evict, and May 24th is the writ of possession, which means that you're not going to be able to throw somebody out. The first time I've ever seen a landlord go to jail happened in your state very recently, where somebody they turned off the gas and the water for their tenant and the electricity, and they put a lockbox on the utilities, and they were held in contempt. The court said, turn it back on. The tenant tried to get it to the landlord. Landlord didn't respond, and they held him in contempt and put him in jail for, I think it was 3 days.
Oh, that's crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
That is, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I get it. Some of these people, they've lost their livelihoods, and there's something being human, but there's also a lot of people that just aren't, they've heard it and they just aren't paying. Now, you guys are getting a little bit of a pass. I think that your rent rates of payments are consistent with what was going on before the pandemic. It's right around 83% paid on time.
Mhm.
And I think you're collecting somewhere around 92% of the rents.
Right now, for us personally, that's where we're sitting. We did fine in April. It was a very normal month, but then we started to be concerned about May. And I would actually say that our collections in May have been better and faster than they were in April. So we're thrilled about that.
People are at home. They don't got anything better to do. So they make sure that they write that check, right?
You're right. We'd like to think that they're thinking that way.
Yeah, no. What we found with because we have some pockets, like we have a few dozen properties in Texas too. And it's just reaching out to people and letting them know that if they're affected, they don't even have to prove that they're affected. You literally can't do anything to these folks. You're not going to remove them from your property.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you may as well just try to work with them and see what you can do as far as getting paid in a timely manner. That's the way we look at it. And I think that's what your board of realtors, the Texas realtors, came out with. We were just talking about it before we started, that they came out with it's not a lease amendment, but it's a payment agreement, right?
Yeah, actually, it's called the COVID-19 lease payment plan.
Yeah.
And so we haven't had to use it yet, but we've got it. We've had a couple tenants that were affected by their jobs from this, but they've paid the rents in full without saying anything. The rents have been paid. So, like I say, we're personally feeling very fortunate right now. Hopefully, as this craziness goes on, because I think we're going to have more economic fallout throughout this at some point, because the economy is not crashing down around us right now. But who knows how that's going to fall out? So, will we maybe see problems down the road? It's a possibility. Yes.
Yeah. How's your unemployment working down there in Texas? Are people getting checks?
There's a lot of people unemployed. I don't know. I don't really listen to much of the news because I just can't stand all the drama and nonsense. But I don't know what our percentages are, but they're high, like everywhere else. There's a lot of people unemployed.
It's not just the unemployment, but it's the access to getting the payment. So, for example, in Nevada, you have people that were laid off in March that have not been able to get unemployment payments.
Right. Yeah.
The system's overwhelmed. It's broken. They're telling them it'll be the end of May into June before they get their first payment.
Yeah, so we've heard that. Yes, I like I say, I haven't really kept track of it with everything going on. My mindset is to maintain business as normal as possible, and I'm not one that follows the news anyhow because I don't listen to that garbage on a regular basis. But that's where we might start seeing some issues down the road. Yes.
Well, the news has certainly projected this idea that somehow you shouldn't be paying your rent during a pandemic, and it hasn't been landlord friendly. So the federal assistance that came out there, and you had this paycheck protection program, pretty much sidestepped landlords.
Right.
The only one that you would be qualified for in the CARES Act would be that the EIDL, the economic injury disaster loans, and then it becomes critical on how you even calculate it. It's going to be your gross profit. So you take off your management fees, and you don't use your depreciation or anything else, and they'll give you a 30-year loan at 3.75% is all they're going to do.
Right.
But yeah, they really left landlords out in the cold.
Mm-hmm.
You will see that you'll be able to take advantage of something called the Main Street program. That is the Fed is going to buy back $6 billion of loans from lenders at 95%. So it's going to mean that the lender can make you a loan. The minimum amount is $500,000. It would be, I believe it's a 4-year loan. It's a 4-year loan that would be at LIBOR plus 3. So it's right around 3.75% right now.
Mm-hmm.
And, those ones will be available to y'all. And the Fed is going to buy 95% of that, take 95% of the risk off of the bank. So they're going to be far more liberal.
Mm-hmm.
The issue there is the calculation is on something called EBITDA, which is the earnings before income tax depreciation and amortization. So you got to make sure you have good financials so you can add that back in.
Right, right.
But
So the minimum was 500,000 on that, right?
That's what they've given. They haven't, pressed the go button yet, and they were getting input. We wanted it down at 50 for small business owners could get access to those funds.
Yeah, 5,000's high. Yeah.
500, it was $1 million, so they cut it in half, and they might do it further as they get, as we see more and more companies are in peril.
Right.
It's going to be really imperative that they get access to capital, and that's one of the ways they're going to get access to capital.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's hope that they bring those numbers down a little bit to help more of the smaller businesses out, because otherwise then, some of us just get cut out of that stuff.
Yeah. It may give money to bigger lenders that they're able to piece it out. And then the other weird one is for those of you guys that are using hard money loans. If you take on any credit, you may violate those hard money loans. And so we've seen people that applied for the EIDL program, and the hard money lender said, no way. If you get that loan, you're in breach of ours. You're not allowed to have debt, even subordinate debt. So depends on, like, are most of your guys, Steve, just there's some are multifamily and a lot of single family?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would say most of our hard money guys, they probably concentrate on the single family, but I believe most of them do have commercial programs as well.
Yeah, and so that's the weird sticky wicket. I can't imagine that a hard money lender is going to really squawk unless they're just trying to find you in violation. I probably just wouldn't tell them.
Right. Well, and I mean, I know most. Well, I won't say most, but I know several of the big hard money guys here, and I think from an ethical standpoint, most of them would be willing to work with their clients, as long as it's a good client that makes their payments on time. Then I would say that most of them will probably work with you on that. But then again, you never know.
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that that's also what we've been seeing is that, again, you as a landlord should be nice to your tenants and be a human being, and most people are acting like human beings during this time. Like they're not just saying, hey, you're in breach. Like, could you say your tenant is breach if they're not able to pay? Absolutely. You're not able to evict them, you're not able to toss them out. But what really should be happening is a conversation with that tenant about what's caused it, because a lot of these folks, you got 20% of the population that's out of work right now, who may not have had a lot of safety net. And if you're just willing to go in there and say, hey, we'll work together, then I think what your board of realtors or your realtors association did was really smart. You don't amend the lease. All you do is you agree to a payment plan on the lease payment.
Mm-hmm.
So you keep your lease in place. And this is really important, because you don't want to unintentionally waive some rights as a landlord because you said, hey, don't worry about this month or something.
Right.
No, don't do that. You may have some waiver issues there if you're trying to if you need to evict that tenant at a later date. Like, they just decide they're never going to pay you again. They could say, well, they waive if I'm not able to, or they change the lease and they waive the ability to evict. Whatever you get into, you want to make sure that you are being very clear that the lease is still in full effect. All we are talking about is a payment plan on the lease payment.
Right. And the way that I take that also is it's based on that month. So if we would have had to use that in April with a tenant, and now we're in May and we have another situation, personally, I would have my manager do another payment program. So we keep it it's very separate, and it's very concise on what we're looking at here.
And you're negotiating the payment of that particular plan.
Yep.
And it is taking you away on some of the lease. Like, you could say, hey, we're getting paid under this other plan, and if you don't pay it, then we're going back to the lease, and then we would enforce the lease.
Mm-hmm. Right. So if and of course, we've also had an issue of, courts being closed. So even if we wanted to evict, it's not like we can go do anything, and we can't go file for eviction even. But if you have a tenant that's in violation of, maybe other things besides rent, is it still your right as that landlord to still continue to do the 3-day move out notices and do those things and still hold up so you can move forward?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You could still do those. You just can't remove them from the premises, and if it's an economic reason. All other reasons you can remove them. So if it's a danger, if there's criminal activity, imminent threat, you can remove them. So this is just for financial. This is just for the people that are not paying their rent, but you could still remove somebody for something else. If they trash your house, you're going to remove them, right? If you find that they're, if you come in there and they're removing all your cabinets and everything else and selling them out the back, yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, that's fine. Then all bets are off on those folks, but getting into a courtroom could be a challenge.
That right. But kind of the point that I wanted to have you confirm is, because of all the media hype, I think a lot of landlords are just under the impression that you can't evict for any reason at all. And it's really, if there's other violations and other things, then you still have the right to evict. But right now, because courts are not open, it makes it a little difficult. And so, we actually had some tenants that we had filed for eviction before all this happened. And then, of course, the court shut down. Now, we got really lucky because the tenants ended up just moving out. And I've actually got a make ready going on right now. But it took them a while before they left. And where, we don't have any idea where they went, because we just, management just went and checked it one day and they were gone. So, keep an eye on your properties also. I think if you have tenants that are not paying, or there's other violations, even though we couldn't evict, management was still going by and knocking on the door and checking to see if they were there. So it could have just been that we were making a nuisance of ourselves and they left. But in that case, we don't care. It doesn't matter to us. But we weren't breaking any laws. We weren't crossing the line. We weren't going in the property, doing things like that.
The other thing, Steve, to be aware of is the CARES Act did restrict your ability to charge late fees and things like that for COVID related non-payment. So, again, you're putting some burden on the tenant. They have to provide you with sufficient proof, like, hey, I got laid off, or I'm caring for somebody. If they're elderly, for example, they may say I'm sheltering and quarantining myself. And then you have I know the courts are allowing the ability to evict come next week, 5 days from now. And then they'll allow other proceedings, the writs of possession, to actually have the sheriff come out in 2 weeks. But you actually have until, I think it's July 24th before you can actually charge late fees and things like that.
Oh, and so they're pushing that off then, huh?
They're kicking it down the road for federally backed mortgages, which is really kind of weird. Like, as an attorney, I look at these things and always say, when is the government taking something from you? It sounds like they're taking something from you under that. So I haven't explored that, and I don't know of anybody that really has. I imagine that if I'm a landlord and you're taking away my ability to charge my tenant an agreed upon amount, then I would say that's the government doing something to me. But there may be some forbearance on those loans as well. Like, they may be doing this for that. So they may be saying, hey, we're not able to foreclose on you either. And there might be a forbearance under the payment that you may have to contact your lender on, but they may be willing to give you some things. Meanwhile, they're taking away some things, right? So I haven't seen any cases on it or any lawsuits on that in particular. My guess is it's because you talk to your lending institution and they're like, hey, we'll give you a 6-month forbearance during this period of time. So you're like, okay. So I'm not hitting my client, and I'm not having to make that payment either.
Right. So maybe you can clear up for some of our people watching the difference in some of the laws that have been set forth from the federal government on loans. You just kind of touched on it a little bit there. And for example, all the properties that I've got, all the properties we own, None of them are federally, all of our financing behind the scenes. So, we've got private lenders, we've got a number of different types of institutions that we work with. Nothing is federally backed. So what is the difference between my rights that I don't have federally backed financing and someone who's got, say, 8 or 10 properties that are conventional loans or Freddie Fannie type loans?
Yeah. So the folks that have the Freddie Fannie are the ones that can't charge late fees, that can't punish the tenant for financially not being able to make the payments. So like literally you have no remedy other than to try to work out a payment plan with that individual. If you don't have those federally backed loans, then you have no you can go forward. You just have the state restriction on evictions and writs of possession and exercising self-help. Self-help was something that you used to never really see, but that's where you just, you lock the doors and you turn off the utilities. If a lot of tenants have it in their name. Actually, I don't even think you guys can turn off the utilities right now, but once we're beyond that period, which is, again, it's either the 18th or the 24th, I believe that people probably could start doing that again. I know the judges aren't liking it, and it's probably not the nicest thing to do to somebody, but you're supposed to be talking to the tenant again and confirming whether they're in financial disarray because of this, or are they just not paying you because they decided they don't want to, because they saw it on the news that they don't have to pay their rent anymore.
Right. Yeah. And like for us and our properties, tenants pay their own utilities. So they're in the tenant's name. So I could not even cut their utilities off.
No, you're really denying them access to the property at some point.
Right.
They leave and you put locks on the door.
Right. Which is something that's kind of been frowned upon here. I've never done that myself, but
I wouldn't do it. I think you're just begging for trouble, especially right now.
Well, I think if you do anything like that, there's been times where it's like, I know a method used to be that go remove the front door and the back door of the house. That was kind of a popular thing for a little while.
So the utilities are in their name, right? But you can go take the breaker. Like you can go do stuff.
Yes.
You can go cut the line. You
could pull the breakers out. You could there are things you could do. Yeah. I'm not recommending it. I'm not advocating
people it. This is what's weird is that was what that landlord did. It was a Texas landlord. I think it was last week, and got himself in hot water. So
yeah. And so, and those are the things that, as that we wanted to kind of bring up to people that because I know that, it can be very frustrating if you in a situation where tenants aren't paying. I've got a lot of other friends that have rental portfolios, and like I said, we're very, very thrilled where we're at right now, and I think most of our friends are
great,
pretty similar. But I've heard some tough stories from people I know in other states where the tenants are tried to kind of band together and just say we're not paying.
Here's what you got to be careful of. And by the way, the federally backed loans have that, but I also think Section 8, if you're a Section 8 landlord, I believe that that's covered too.
Right. But the one thing is that Section 8 is paying great.
Yeah. Oh, you wouldn't be messing around with Section 8 because they're still making the payments, but
exactly.
But so you're not supposed to penalize them. I guess it's if the government doesn't print enough money, or I don't know. I've never seen a voucher system be late. I guess.
And we do Section 8 tenants. We've got, this is
sometimes the voucher's not enough, right? Sometimes the voucher is partial and they're paying. So my guess is that that's what it's covering.
Yeah, it's covering their amount. So most of our tenants that are on housing pays most of their rent. So we've got tenants that housing pays 100% plus gives them a utility voucher as well. We have, I think, one tenant that they pay half and their rent and housing pays half, and that tenant has paid their half without question. That's also a tenant we've had for about 5 years. And
so if they didn't, then you wouldn't be able to pile on the late fees, etc.
Correct.
Again, just do a payment plan with these folks.
Yeah, and that's in the beginning, when in April, when all this kind of really started.
Hmm.
That was one of the things that we did. There's a lot of different approaches that people took, um, and the way the approach we took was we contacted tenants, and it wasn't wasn't asking them if they couldn't pay rent. It was more of how's your health? Is your family safe? Are you still working? We geared our conversations like that, and we actually got a lot of very good feedback from all of our tenants. And like I said, only a few tenants were affected by their loss of job. And we actually had one tenant that we told them we'd put them on a payment plan. They said they agreed, and then they paid the rent in full. So then we had another tenant that she was ahead of the game. She had been laid off. She had already filed for unemployment, and told us that rent's already been mailed, so you're good. And then May has come. As far as I know, those two tenants, since my manager deals with them, I believe those two particular tenants are still out of work. Rent was paid 100% by both of them. So, but I think communication is a huge factor in this. And just the kind of person I am and the way we run our company, we're very big on communication anyhow. Um, so we've been fortunate, and I hope everybody else out there has, but we're just trying to give some advice and some ideas of things.
Hmm.
If you're in that situation that you're not getting the rents like you need to, our first thing that we're doing is first and foremost, if we have a tenant that can't pay, there's a lot of jobs available out there right now. All the major grocery stores, Walmart's, Amazon, these places are dying for employees.
Steve, we were trying to hire people last week.
Mm-hmm.
They're not taking the job because they make more on unemployment.
I know, it's crazy. It's crazy. So and it's kind of funny because the grocery chains, I mean, they're paying 12, 13, 14 bucks an hour, and that's certainly enough to get by on. And especially for the types of rental properties we've got.
But you're making 600 bucks a week from the federal side plus the state unemployment.
Mm-hmm.
So you're competing with somebody. I think it's anything under 30 bucks an hour, you may as well be unemployed because the unemployment is better.
Mm-hmm.
And the only exception is if you're not able to get the unemployment, like again in my state, when somebody gets it, they're afraid to come off it. Mm-hmm. Because they know that they probably won't. It'll be very, very difficult to get back on because quite literally nobody answers the phone over there. Mm-hmm. And the phones will turn on and an hour later it says that they're at capacity for the day.
Yeah. So yeah, I've heard those stories as well, and I haven't tried to call, and I have no desire to try and call and get in that. But
here's another thing to consider too. Before, like some of you guys are, to hell with it. I'm just, I'm going to go after these folks, and once the evictions are allowed, you got to be a little careful because you do have some Americans with Disability Act. You have some, you have some issues if somebody has a compromised immune system or has comorbidity. I believe that they're going to possibly fit underneath that disability realm. Mm-hmm. And you could be buying yourself a pretty nasty lawsuit if you remove somebody for that disability.
Right.
So before, I think if we're just human beings about this, you're going to not have any issues. But if you do have somebody who is, they're not responsive, or like maybe they're really scared, it could be that they're home freaking out because they know that this virus would actually be deadly to them. Mm-hmm. And again, you want to just, if you can somehow go in there and communicate, even if you're keeping your distance, tapping on, which brings up that, there's all sorts of fun issues. Can you even access that premises? Mm-hmm. Can you have workers come into a premises? What happens if the worker tests positive for COVID? Do you have a requirement to come in and talk to people and let them know that they may have been exposed? We all have contractors that go out and do work on properties. Can a tenant say you're not allowed access because I'm susceptible, I have comorbidities, or I'm elderly? You have all these weird issues that we never have to deal with that are popping up right now just because there's so much fear. And the answers are somewhat, in some cases you could say, yeah, I know that my lease says that I have access, but if I'm being denied access, do I want to push it? Or do I want to say, tenant, you tell me what works for you, what's the big issue, and just be as flexible as you can to make sure that they're at ease.
Mm-hmm.
Because some of these folks believe that if somebody walks into the premises and they come in within 3 or 4 hours, there's a chance that they're going to catch that disease if that person, touched anything, left anything behind. It is like there is some people are just deathly scared of this thing.
Right.
So you as a landlord are going to have to kind of navigate that minefield.
No, that brings up an excellent point, because we've always prided ourselves with all of our tenants and all of our properties, when a maintenance issue comes in, we have that maintenance person that's going to handle that property in contact with that tenant the same day, setting a schedule, an appointment to go and fix whatever the problem is, unless it's an emergency and we have to get over there immediately. I think it's very important. Like I said, we pride ourselves on taking care of our tenants, but there's got to be a little bit more flexibility in that, I think, right now, because of all this. I think you're 100% correct, because you don't know how people are going to react, and no matter what, we're still in a society that people like to get sue crazy, and something that you do today that you think is normal and you're taking care of it correctly could come to bite you, in a month or two, when things get a little bit back more towards normal.
Something to consider. And I'm not a plaintiff's lawyer. I don't particularly care for them. A lot of them that are the contingency fee folks, but the courts have been shut down. So who hasn't been getting paid?
Oh yeah.
Are the plaintiff's lawyers. And even more importantly, when they do reopen, there's going to be a glut of cases. And that's going to be very problematic for some of these folks, because they're not going to be able to get in front of a jury for 3 years. So why would a defense firm authorize payment, or why would an insurance company authorize payment? So you're going to see some people doing some things that they wouldn't otherwise be doing, and just make sure that you don't have that target sitting on your back.
Right.
A lot of times we talk about, how to structure the business and make sure it's isolated from you personally. If you haven't done that, it might be a time to do that. And then more importantly, call up your insurance company and make sure that any foreseeable situation that you have coverage for it, that you're not looking at an exclusion, because it could be a nasty surprise for you. Again, I'm not saying that it's going to get crazy, but I know up here in, at least in Nevada, all of a sudden you have all these business interruption lawsuits, because most business interruption precludes pandemics. Like it literally says, and a lot of leases also do that too, by the way. It precludes pandemics, epidemics, or acts of God and things like that, or it will specifically exclude virus. And so you have all these businesses that are shut down, and their business interruption insurance isn't covering them. So these lawyers are jumping on saying, how much, can we squeeze anything out of these insurance companies with the threat of a lawsuit? You just want to make sure that you're not sitting behind anything, any of these cases, and that if there are exclusions, that you're aware of them. You don't want to find out that your insurance isn't going to defend you in a case underneath these circumstances. You don't want to find that out when you're sued. You want to find that out early on and then take reasonable measures to mitigate that. It will change your negotiating position. Just so if I know that I could be opening myself up to a disabilities lawsuit, then I'm going to behave quite differently than if I believe I'm in the right and that I have nothing to worry about.
Right. Well, and another point that you made that I'll just touch on even a little bit more is, when the courts start opening back up, there's going to be a flood of people trying to get into the courts, get evictions filed, so normally down here, depending on what precinct you're in, when you file eviction, when you go in and file the day you file, they assign you the court date that day, and generally it's about 2 weeks out. I would say that could jump to a month or 2 months out.
I think it's going to be longer than that, Steve, just because when they do reopen, they're going to have to follow the guidelines. And so it's going to be really difficult for them to transact business as normal. You're talking about, you've seen it. You see judges in masks and, again, it's uncomfortable. The criminal courts are still having to operate during all this stuff. The civil courts have been sitting on their hands. They've been able to shut down for the most part, although there is still flow. It's just most of the county courts and have been shutting down. When they do reopen, not only is there going to be a backlog, but there's going to be alterations in the way that they do business.
Yeah, I mean, a lot less people in courtrooms. Yeah, so the whole flow is going to be slowed down for who knows how long. Yeah,
they're talking here. We were looking at about 1.5 years for a trial, and it's going on 3 years now, and they're saying it could be going up to 4.
Wow, that's crazy.
Just from this little delay.
Yeah, because usually before all this happened, when you went to evict, if you filed and you had a court date in 2 weeks, you could generally have a tenant out in the next 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
That's if you didn't have to go into filing a writ of possession or doing any of that. That's been pretty normal here since I've owned rental properties. But we could definitely be in a situation where you might have to deal with that tenant for a whole lot longer. So that also goes back to the point from the beginning of this conversation of talking with your tenants, trying to work things out the best you can. And in every case that you can do that. If not, that tenant could potentially be sitting on your dime for the next who knows how long, and you still have to make your payments on that property every month.
And we haven't, I'm with you, we haven't seen a big decrease in collections. Like, again, they keep saying, oh, it's going to be next month, but we didn't see it this month. And they kept saying it was going to be this month, last month. And I was like,
well, and the tenants that we still, our tenants are still working. They still have their jobs. So, we've been very fortunate. And of course, we've always kept our rental properties in a price point where, like another issue that we've got here is, oil and gas is in the toilet right now. And we've
coming back, $25 a barrel, right?
Yeah. So I've always stayed out of what I consider the higher end rental properties. $200,000, $250,000, $300,000 rental properties is something I've always stayed away from, because those are the first guys that are going to get hit. And that's, when we see layoffs going across the board, that's a price range that gets hammered. And I want to be in the price range where all those guys have to come down and live in my properties because they can't afford those properties anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And with most of our properties, even if you're on unemployment, even if you're taking those $12, $13, $14 an hour jobs, you can pay my rent. And so
I'm with you 100% on that, by the way. There's a lot of folks that really love some of that, the higher end.
Mm-hmm.
And I draw my line at around $150,000 on a property. I start getting really nervous, and I'm much more comfortable at about 75.
Yeah, well, I do a lot of talks about that. Our sweet spot for rental properties is an ARV between 80 and 120.
Yeah,
I think that has just always been a very, very sweet spot for us. But we've got properties in the 130, 140, 150 ARV range, and those work out fine too. Especially when you're getting $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 a month rent. A lot of people can still afford that if they have to make a temporary change in their job. And so as you move forward, think about that. If you're a landlord that's doing the higher end, I've actually I had a conversation with a landlord the other day, and he's got about 10 properties, and all of them are in that higher echelon, and he's got a whole lot of vacant properties right now. He can't put
that was getting out ahead of it. Like there was the fastest growing segment over the last 10 years was that was the tenant that makes over $75,000 a year. I think that at a 3 million growth, at least the last time I looked at the stats, was from 2000 to 2018. There was 3 million additional renters in the country just because we had that little recession. But the biggest area, 2 million of them were the $75,000 and above. So people were thinking these are the millennials and people with all the student debt and the automobile debt, and they're not going to be able to buy a house because they can't get a mortgage. And they were getting there. That still scares me. What we've seen, because we went through a pretty nasty recession here, like as far as the country's concerned, no place was worse for real estate than Las Vegas. We were the foreclosure capital of the country, and we lost 75% of our values. My rents went up that entire time because there was so much demand. It was weird, and I stick in the same range as you, maybe a little cheaper just because we were buying them from distressed homeowners. But you know, those houses now are worth probably $300,000 a pop. So I wouldn't buy them now, but at the time we got them really.
Definitely. Well, you know, and I will say for the vacant properties that we've had, we've been putting tenants in properties, so we're actually getting an influx of tenants right now, and we've actually been able to raise our rents a little bit.
Yeah,
without any problem.
Steve, I think that it's going to increase. Whenever you have the tightening of the belt, people become more value. And if you are in that range, you're going to have much more demand because you're going to have the people going down into it. That's what we've seen too. 100%.
Yeah.
Every time we have a property, I'll use North Carolina as one example, because we had an apartment there that we redid. And before we even started doing the rehabs on them, we had every unit rented for 2 months out.
Wow, that's fantastic.
It's pretty weird. And then when we buy a property, without even listing it, you'll have people dropping by applications. And so my property manager there has about 3,000 properties, and the vacancy rate, his little sheet of vacancies is usually less than 20 at any given time, which means it's next to nothing. And those don't sit on the market very long at all, but it's all what you're talking about. It's all in that sweet spot. So yeah, I'm with you 100%, probably 110%. That's really served us well over the years.
Yeah. And also, you know, I mean, there are some deals starting to pop up out there. You know, we're targeting some very specific neighborhoods right now, to go in and try and get some more properties. Even though I don't think we're at the really sweet spot that I think we're going to hit for discounted properties, there's still stuff out there. And if you're want to be buy rental properties, I think now is the time to start looking and getting your stuff in order, getting your financing in order. You know, how are you going to finance these deals? And putting your plans together to move that direction. So even if you don't pull the trigger now, when the time comes, you're prepared and you can move quickly, because when we hit whatever bottom we're going to hit, or wherever that ends up, that window is not going to last forever. It's going to be a short window. I think it'll be a much shorter window than the 2008 financial crash. Although I could be wrong. It's just a gut feeling. And it's not a prediction. It's just
this is self-inflicted. This is not a economic downturn. This is we shut down the economy and caused massive unemployment. Most of that should get within 6 months will get sucked back up. But during that 6 months, you're going to see a lot of people in a lot of pain.
Yeah. And as real estate investors, we'll need to move quickly for the opportunities that we can get, because like I said, I don't think they're going to last that long. And we just need to be ready.
Keep your powder dry. What did they say? Keep your powder dry and make sure that you're ready for those opportunities when they pop in. Because I think it's going to be 60, 90 days that you're going to really start seeing some things. We're seeing it here in Vegas, by the way, where we were the hottest residential market, and it's cooling off.
Yeah.
We're still selling, but a lot of houses are hitting the market, which just this is the same thing that happened right before the recession. Now, we did this one to ourselves. Again, we shut down our economy. Our casinos there, which are the lifeblood of this town, have been shut down now for a couple months.
Mhm.
And that's probably not going to get better anytime soon. And there's a lot of people that are feeling it. And I think you're going to see a lot of houses here. I think you're going to, yeah, you guys are oil, so you're probably going to see a lot of properties popping in, and it's
Mhm.
becoming real for folks.
Yeah.
Very real in May and June. I think in July, I think it's going to become crisis level for a lot of people, which is if you have the ability to come in and help some folks out by taking the properties off their hands, there might be some great opportunities.
Definitely. I totally agree. So Angie, are we getting some questions coming in?
Yes, we have a lot of questions.
Okay, well, why don't you start throwing some questions our way?
Okay, the first question is, what if the tenant is not paying rent and has nothing to do with COVID?
Okay, so technically, then you don't have to worry about the CARES Act at all, because they have to show that it's COVID related. You still have to worry about when can you actually do an eviction. Assuming that if it's not COVID related, they're just not paying, then you're just going to have to wait for the courts to reopen and bring that up. But you'll be able to do that here in the next couple weeks, few weeks.
But what I would do is I would go ahead and I would get my 3-day move out notice with them, do all the things you can do now. So when the courts open up, you can move quickly and get into that courtroom as soon.
And yeah, absolutely. When I say you can't evict, it just means you can't remove them, but you do everything else up until that point. So yeah, you're going to do your 3-day pay rent and start the process. And then, yeah, but the COVID protection is related to COVID and being affected by it. It's pretty hard to not be affected by this right now. So if it's somebody who's just working and deciding that they're not going to pay you, they're supposed to be able to provide you proof that they've been affected by COVID for that to actually kick in.
Right. Okay, very good.
What about the tenants who receive the stimulus payment but are not paying rent?
So the stimulus payment is an aside. If they're experiencing financial hardship because of COVID, I believe you're still going to have the restrictions underneath the CARES Act. Whether if you have, let me think about how to say this. So if you have a federally backed mortgage, or if it's a voucher program, then the CARES Act is going to apply if they say that they've been affected by COVID, period, whether they have a stimulus check or not, and that they're experiencing financial hardship, especially if they've been laid off. It's going to be tough to get over that. You could say, hey, but you have the money. They still owe you the money. It's just you're giving up some of your remedies, and you can't remove them from the property until July. They still owe it. So if they have money, in theory, you wait your period of time, you remove them from the property, and you continue to go after them to recover the amounts that they didn't pay you.
Right.
Which I know nobody really does, right? Do you ever go after the folks that you get out, or do you just say good riddance?
Well, we do. When we do an eviction, we file a judgment. I've never had a tenant pay me though.
So this is going to crack you up. So this was, I think it was in 1999 in Washington State. And I had a friend whose dad had his retirement was this rental property in Tacoma, Washington. So he evicted a mom and her son because the son was dealing drugs out of the house. Well, the mom did not like that the landlord accused her son of dealing drugs, because he was an angel and he never did anything like that, even though we had yeah. So she took a ball hammer and she smashed just about every inch of his walls. She just destroyed his house. And so she thought she was going to walk away from that, because nobody goes after tenants, right? Mm-hmm. So we go after her, and she goes into bankruptcy. And so the bankruptcy guy is like, well, you're not going to be able to get anything. And I said, no, this is intentional act. There's an exclusion if you do it yourself. And he goes, well, you could try. And he goes, she's never going to admit to anything. And of course, we go into court, and it didn't take much of getting underneath her skin before she started cussing and swearing and saying that, yeah, she took a ball hammer and smashed all the doors. So we got this judgment that she couldn't bankrupt. We followed that gal around. She just paid it off about 5 years ago. We garnished her every time. Every time she turned around, it would be like, it was just because it was a friend's
Right,
dad.
right. All
It's the
right,
only
Andy,
time we've ever gone after somebody like that. It was just like any time. It was like anytime she had money in her account, it was
right. What we got next, Angie?
Okay, so this person will be executing a lease with a tenant this week. What about including COVID-19 waiver and indemnity provisions in the lease? Any suggestion on wording?
I guess I need to make sure that I get my head around that. I don't know if you can do COVID waiver. I'm not 100% sure that. My gut tells me that there's certain things that you're not going to be able to waive, as far as, the landlord's negligence and things like that. But I guess you could always say that you're taking it with a understanding that perhaps, I'm trying to think of the scenario. Can you think about this?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how I would answer. I know that we've put tenants in properties. We've not put any type of provision for COVID in any of the leases.
I think you could try. I just don't know. It's kind of like employees coming back to work saying, "Hey, you understand that there's a risk," but here you're giving a property and you're trying to waive your like it would almost be like you're trying to waive negligence or that you have COVID on the property. I'm not certain how that would work. It's something we can always look up, but it's not something that I'm 100% up on right now. That's for sure.
Yeah.
My gut tells me that that you're going to have public policy issues, but it might be that you're able to do it and say, hey, you understand that you're taking this in the middle of a pandemic, or that, and that we've cleaned the property to the best and you hold us harmless. If you contract COVID, that it's not the property. I suppose you could do something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. We had somebody that stated Texas eviction laws are very specific, and lockouts, utility cutoff, etc., are prohibited without following the eviction process first.
Yep. So when you're not able to get remedy from the courts, that's where the gentleman over this pandemic exercised the self-help, because the courts weren't responding. He gave notice to the tenant, and then went ahead and did his own. So the court said, hey, turn our utilities back on. And she gave him notice and he didn't respond. And so they held him in contempt for not doing what the court order said, and went and arrested him and put him in jail for a few days. So right. I think it's pretty clear. Don't do self-help.
Well, and it's been my experience, and this is when I was a very beginner landlord and very mom and pop. Mm-hmm. I would sometimes do what I would call the strong arm method, but it was 100% bluff. So I might say I was going to do something to try and get a tenant to move out. I might go over and give them a move out letter, make them sign it saying that they were going to move out, things of that nature, and hoping that they would. I know that when I did that a couple times, tenants just up and moved out. They didn't question me. Mm-hmm. But when they did question me, you have to stop doing what you're doing. You have to go through the proper process of evicting a person. So it's not something I would suggest to anybody to do. That was when I was very young and didn't know how to do anything right. And I had no experience, and I shouldn't have, I was a terrible landlord at the time. But go through the proper procedures. I'm very much a believer of that.
Yeah. And this is the thing. There's nothing about forgiveness of rent. Mm-hmm. Zero. They owe you the money, period. It's just, can they pay? Will they pay? If you get to the point where you think they're playing games, you still have other remedies available to you. It's just right now off the table is tossing them on the street, because there's a public health issue and you don't want to put them into that situation. And just as a human being, don't put them in that situation. We had in Nevada, we have kind of our own Skid Row out by Catholic Charities, which is by a stadium. A friend of mine builds these huge, the big white tents that you see for casinos and for the convention center and things like that. They just basically kicked all the homeless off the street. And so they went into this parking lot, and he built this the structure for them. But I mean, these people were literally just passing the COVID around.
Mm-hmm.
Really bad scenarios. So I wouldn't want to put a tenant into that situation. Thank God he built that facility for them, because that was a private deal. That was not the government doing anything. And he ended up building it in a parking lot of a stadium out there, which was pretty extraordinary. So these folks would have individual spaces, so they weren't sitting there just infecting, because we had the COVID was running through that community really in an extreme way. So they're just trying to prevent you from putting somebody into that scenario, saying, hey, if you don't pay rent, it's not something you should die over, right? It's not something that you should be put into extreme peril over. So they still owe you the money. It's just, you can't kick them out right now. So
Right.
you'll still have that remedy available to you, but right now it's off the table.
Can a person evict tenants whose father has been visiting for an extended amount of time that is not allowed per the lease agreement?
That sounds like other reasons underneath the lease, but I doubt that they would allow you to evict. There's this, when can we? It says other non-COVID related issues. Can you remove them? But again, I think the public policy of the rules is that you're not taking people and putting them onto the street during the pandemic.
Right. And I think something else that may occur, just based on, some of the judges that you might be going up in the precincts for an eviction, like in our situation, our manager knows a lot of the different judges, and he knows how he has to present based on who that judge is. And, is a judge even going to want to consider that right now? Because they might be afraid of them putting themselves in jeopardy for the next election. Who knows? But something to think about. But yeah, I mean, yes, it's a whole other issue besides rent. It's just a matter of, are you going to be able to get a judge to go your way right now? And that's up in the air.
Yeah. So like, you may still be able to bring the action. Again, they're doing something underneath the lease. The issue is, I cannot remove them for certain for non-payment, especially if there's COVID related. And you have the state law and you have the federal law. The federal under the CARES Act applies to, if it's voucher or FHA, the state applies to everybody. So the state is relaxing its requirements next week. The federal stays in, so it depends on whether you have a mortgage that is backed by the feds. But regardless, that's not a non-COVID related issue. That's somebody violating your lease. And I think you'd be able to be successful. Just know, like Steve just said, you're going to have some activist judges and some other people saying, what the heck? Right. So I would be letting them know and saying, and maybe agreeing to have them pay you something extra for it.
That could be a good solution. Yeah.
Just say, hey, I understand your dad's there, but there's more wear and tear on the house. We need to come to some sort of accommodation.
Mm-hmm. That's a good alternative.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What is the landlord's right when listing a home and the tenant is using COVID to not allow showings?
That's, you're going to look at your lease agreement and they're going to have to allow you access. If they keep denying you access, I'm trying to think of what you would do. You would actually be like, you're going to bring the legal action for sure, but they're in breach of their lease. So you're just going to be bringing an action in the court, and obviously they're not going to be there very long. So it's more of a just, can I get that person out of there, or can I at least get a court that's saying, hey, you have to allow us access? Like your lease agreement more than likely has a provision in there that you're allowed reasonable access.
Yeah, on our leases, we have a dollar amount. If a tenant was not to allow us to show a property, then we have a dollar amount specified in the lease that the tenant has signed off on. But what you might do is talk to that tenant about scheduling some times when they could bring someone over to look at that property, and where that person is not there at the time to, maybe counterbalance their thought process of being nervous if someone comes in while they're there. Don't know what their reasoning for that is, but might be an alternative.
Yeah, so they're just immediately, I mean, I already know what the argument's going to be. They're going to say, I am susceptible, and now you have a disabilities and a reasonable accommodation issue. Mm-hmm. So if it's just young person who has fear, then you're just talking to them saying, like Steve's, exactly, you're just going to have a conversation with them saying, hey, what do we have to do? We have to be able to show this. You can't deny us. You can't deny a fire marshal. You can't deny, the landlord for certain access. But if somebody has comorbidity or is older, then we don't know, but they would have an argument that they fall under a disability. And then you as a landlord, it shifts over to you to make reasonable accommodations. And so it's just saying, hey, I need to have somebody access this. What do we need to do? And I'm like, you could always just say, hey, that individual comes in, they're going to wear certain protective gear. We're going to wipe down the facility or the property when we leave. Like, there's going to be some things where you're going to say, hey, we took all the reasonable actions. If they still deny you, then you're bringing the action under the lease for certain. And I think you're right, especially in the Texas residential lease. I know that there's a provision in there on charging them a fee for denying the access.
Right.
We have one person that asked, are the Houston courts open? Can you evict now?
I don't think any of the court systems are open right now. I think everything is still shut down. And
statewide evictions are closed until May 18th.
Yeah, I mean, we're coming up on the deadline, but then again, as we get closer to the deadline, the mayor may change that deadline again. Like I think he did. He's already pushed it out once, and he could push it out again.
Yeah, and again, I have two Texas attorneys, but Carl Zellner. I'll again, if you guys have specific questions, you could shoot them over to Steve, and he could forward them over, and we'll have somebody look into some of those things for you on the specific. Again, I have properties in Houston. It wouldn't take much to talk to a couple of our contacts there to see, but I'm pretty sure that from a state standpoint, you're closed on the evictions until at least the 18th. And then if you have a federally backed mortgage, then you have to be concerned about the CARES Act, because that's going to take you out all the way to July 24th.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, this person notified a condominium association that they would need to halt monthly assessments while they work things out with tenants. The HOA denied their request and filed a lien on the property and is now threatening foreclosure. Can you advise as to what to do?
So you as the landlord, I guess maybe I didn't quite get the.
Well, the way I might be wrong, but the way I think I understand this is a townhouse or a condominium, and they've got a monthly HOA fee, and they've requested with the HOA to forego their monthly HOA fee while this is going on, and the HOA has denied them, but apparently they still haven't paid it, and now the HOA wants to foreclose on the property.
I don't think you have a right to not pay it.
I would agree. Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, first off,
I don't think they'll be able to foreclose on you and kick you out. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I don't think they'll be able to do much with it, but
yeah.
That goes into another issue, is if you have mortgages, etc. Go ahead.
Well, looks like we got a little bit of internet issue.
Sorry, Steve.
Okay.
Oh, is it mine doing weird stuff?
I'm not sure. Did break it up a little bit, but we'll get it back here.
I'll see if I can.
With HOAs, okay, I'll just talk for a minute. HOAs can be really tough. Whether they really have legal action during this period of time or not, I do not know. I would think that no matter what, you still are responsible for paying the HOA dues every month. And that's just coming from me as a landlord. It's not coming from a legal perspective at all. It's just my opinion. But I would think that you would probably need to pay those dues.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think that you're going to have to pay the HOA, and the HOAs out here are the bane of our existence in Nevada. And I'm sure that that's not much different in Texas. It's really hard to get away from them. In fact, in my state, they have super liens, so they can step in front of your mortgage and they can foreclose on your property, even without paying back the mortgage holder. So they have, like, you don't mess around with your HOA. That said,
unfortunately, they have a lot more power than they should. Yeah. And maybe talk to them about payment plan.
Yeah, and then it's the same thing with your mortgages, et cetera. The time to actually talk to them is before you need it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're having any sort of struggles, I'd be reaching out to any mortgages you have to and see if you can get deferment or have payments put on the end. Before 2008, it was so easy to do mortgage. What is it called? A reconstruction. There's actually a term for a recast as well, where you take your payments, and if you've been paying extra, you don't really get a credit towards your payments under a normal mortgage. But if you recast it, then they take a look at your balance that's owed and they put it out over the remainder of the term. So if you've been paying down your principal last year and now you're in a financial strike, you can actually do a recast of that mortgage and shave off, 20-30% of it, depending on how much of that principal you paid. A lot of folks don't realize that's even an issue, or that it's even a possibility, but you got to talk to the mortgage holder on it and say, hey, is there a possibility to do a recast? That is not something that gets reported to your credit. That is not something that, like the reduced payment will get reported to your credit, which will be good for you, but it's not showing up as a derogatory issue. And if you do a mortgage modification, again, it could be paid as agreed, and you just agree to put the payments on the backside. Most federal stuff, you already have you're already going to get deferment, but I would just be talking to the lenders under those situations and seeing whether there's some opportunities for you. And again, do not forget about that recast. Almost nobody talks about it, but for people that, like in this situation, you had an awesome economy, and then you had an abrupt stop to it because we decided to shut ourselves down. And so people were oftentimes overpaying their mortgages, paying extra amounts to their principal, figuring that they were going to pay it off early, but it did nothing to your continued payment. The only way you change that payment is if you recast that mortgage, and you might be pleasantly surprised when they do it, that something that was $1,200 might become an $800 payment because you'd already been paying for the last few years some extra payment amounts.
Nice to know. What else we got, Angie?
Under the CARES Act, does a landlord have the obligation to renew a lease with a tenant?
I don't believe that it actually covers the renewal. I think it just comes that they can't charge late fees and penalties during the term. And the states are the ones that and start evictions. So it's only the CARES Act only covers, again, federally backed mortgages. So landlords with federally backed mortgages and the voucher programs.
Yeah, and my thought on it would be is if you've got a tenant that wants to renew and if they've been a good tenant, I would renew them. If they want to move but give you a 30-day notice, but they might want to wait till after things settle down, maybe you make an agreement to go to month with them. So
yeah, and remember, they still owe you money. So even if the lease expires and they're in there, they still owe you. It changes to a month to month. They still owe you the money. They're not walking away from the money. It's just I can't sue them right now, and it's only if they can't make the payment because of COVID. So if they're full-time employed and they're goofing around, you could still bring actions, and then it's just getting access to the courts, which is a state issue. It's not a CARES Act issue. So CARES Act does not apply if it's not COVID and it's not a federally backed or a voucher program. Ignore the Fed if it's not those facts. And then you just have to look at what your state, county, all the way down to the city, depending on where, in some places.
Right.
Would it be a good idea to start a petition to the Texas state government requesting they not extend any current eviction beyond the current June 1st date?
I don't know. I suppose you could.
I don't know.
I would say that
Yeah. I would
if you
think
put something
that
out in
you might
public,
be
just know that it could be attacked.
wasting go say it again.
Yeah,
You broke up a little bit there.
Yeah, I would just say that anything you write can and will be used against you, so in the court of public opinion. So if you write and get a petition, expect a tenants group to grab it and say, look at all these greedy landlords trying to throw people out on the street. So I might write a letter just saying, hey, it's creating quite a hardship. We need remedies, and put some self-gratifying. Hey, we don't want anybody to be removed, but there's some people out here taking advantage that aren't actually affected, and they're really hurting us as landlords that are really struggling to keep our properties accessible, whatever.
Yeah, I would be very careful about that because the popular opinion might backfire on you in something like that, and that could the ramifications from that could bite you in the butt a lot worse.
Oh yeah. We've seen that. Anything you write to somebody, they may just make it may make its way into a newspaper. So
well, and things can be twisted. Things are, some people are very good at twisting the truth. So
they may take excerpts.
Right.
If the situation is not COVID related, how do you get the tenant out of the house?
Then you would actually just bring the eviction process. If it's not COVID related, then you're just waiting for your court to open so you can actually bring the process.
Yeah. So, do the things like we said, if it's not COVID related, and give the move out notice, follow the system of what you have to do now to get that in play. So when the courts do open, you can get down there and file that eviction. And hopefully, get a court date as soon as possible to get that tenant out of there.
The hard part is when your court's closed. And so then you may have to go to another courtroom. And you're doing exigent circumstances, emergency, harm to others, criminal activity, and you're bringing the police involved or somebody else, then you don't have anything to worry about. They're going to go down there and take care of it. So if somebody's running is doing drugs out of your property, get the police involved if your court's not open. They'll usually take care of things and then take it from there.
Right. What you got now, Angie?
Several of them were comments. Then somebody said, do you know if there are any limitations on evictions in Arkansas, if not COVID, federal loan related?
Arkansas, I'm sure there's restrictions. They're almost all states pass something. I'm not on the top of my head though. I wouldn't know. I would just I'd probably be doing the exact same thing you were doing, which is I'm either going to call my property manager or I'm going to call, get on a listserv with some attorneys and say, all right, what's going on in your courts? But
yeah, if you're in another state, states vary and counties vary. So, I can talk about Texas with what I know here, just from an owner and landlord standpoint. But if it's another state, get on the websites, talk to the attorneys in that state and find out what the specifics are that you can and cannot do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you want someone that's dealing in those local courthouses. So anywhere you go, it's, the old adage is a good lawyer knows the law, a great lawyer knows the judge. There's a lot of truth in that.
A lot of truth in that.
You need to have somebody that goes in and has, lunch with the judge once in a while, and you're using their integrity and their credibility so that, you know, they know that you're not doing something crazy. You know, here we always look at the pro se's. I clerked for 3 different judges, so when you had them coming in and it was pro se, you're always like, oh, which means they're representing themselves. If they had a good lawyer, then you're like, okay, we can take whatever they say and believe it. So then you're getting yourself a lot more success just because you're using somebody that has credibility.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So my last question that we have, I'm not 100% sure what they mean by it. So they said, what if the property is free and clear? So like there's no mortgage note. So
then you only have to worry about the state. So if you have no mortgage note, then the Federal CARES Act does not apply to you. You're just dealing with the state. So the feds can only control stuff that has a federal interest. The rest of it is the state. And so you're just dealing with your state. So you'll be able to do evictions next week. You'll be able to do rid of possessions in the following week, or 2 weeks after that. So you'll be able to get your properties back relatively quickly. And again, none of this affects the fact that they owe you the money. So, you know, so you don't have to worry. If you own it free and clear, then just be talking to the tenant and seeing what you can do to make sure that you're able to get payment over a longer period, tack it on to the end, increase, say, hey, pay me an extra $50 a month, whatever it is. If it's a long-term tenant, just work with them. You're so much better off anyway. I don't know how much you guys get into the turn of the property, Steve, but in the properties that I own, I lose about 6 months to a year of rent every time I turn a property. So I do whatever I can to keep that tenant. I send them gifts. I do whatever I can. Like, they're my friends, and I want a 4 to 5 year tenant every time.
Yeah, when you used to have to start turning properties, it costs. It can get very expensive. So you know, first off, trying to put good tenants in, and then, you know, like I said, we communicate with tenants. We check properties. We do all these things to try and be very proactive opposed to being reactive. And it helps us out a lot. We were actually talking. I was talking to my manager last month, I guess it was, and we didn't realize it, but we've got one tenant that has actually been. You know, she was there long before we ever owned the property. We've owned the property probably about 12 years now. She's been in the property for 26 years. Never late on a payment. Never a problem. If she needs a maintenance issue, she, you know, goes through all the proper channels. Of course, when she calls and has a maintenance issue, it's like, I want somebody over there that day immediately to help her out, because you don't find tenants like that. But you know, it to me, it's about doing the right thing for your tenants. And you know, I've always said it. I've said it many times in many talks that I do. These are not rental properties to me. These are our assets. And we want to take as good care of our assets as possible, which includes the tenant as part of that asset, because they are taking care of that property. They are paying that property. They're paying the note on that property for you and helping you pay taxes, insurance, and all those things that go along with it. So, you know, I think if you take care of your tenants, you're going to have fewer problems. I think we've seen that so far with our experience. And, you know, and it's just the right thing to do. I don't want to have a reputation as a landlord slum, you know, or you know, doing any of that kind of stuff like that. And you know, just do the right thing, and it'll take you a long way, especially as a landlord. And
Steve, you are absolutely 100%. Like, there's always what you could do and there's what you should do. And when we start looking at the code and you're saying, what can I do? It's good to know what your remedies available to you are. But I'll just tell you, if you have to go to court, you've already lost. And there's never good stuff that happens in court.
Right.
And, you know, maybe you get your property back. But I remember here, we would actually bribe people to leave the property, because out here in Vegas during the recession, they would like to do things like stick cement down your toilet, or they would put, you know, dead fish up in your in your in the what is it, in the air ducts and stuff, and they would do some mean things if you were removing them. I never had that issue because we would just say, what do we need to do to keep you? What do we need to do? But it was rampant out here. So when we would buy a house, if it was at a foreclosure and you had somebody in there, we would just bribe them. Hey, I'll give you $3,000. You
Yep.
what?
Cash for
You know,
keys.
and they're like, $3,000. I'd be like, yeah, because now I know that you're going to leave and you're not going to mess with my house.
Yeah, yeah, very important. So, I think this has been an awesome, awesome conversation. Toby, I can't thank you enough. Oh, we just had a question come in. Go ahead, Angie.
Okay. If the landlord cannot make the payments, what financial assistance programs are available to the landlord?
So you have the EIDL, the economic injury disaster loans, which you would automatically qualify for at least $1,000 of emergency grant money. And then you'd probably, the loan is actually based on 50% of your gross profit. So your rents minus your management fee. So, it's not going to be huge, but it's 3.75%. That 1,000 is forgiven immediately. And you have a 30-year loan, so it's a really small payment if you need it. You also have, depending on who your mortgage is with, you would have some deferment that you'd be eligible for. More than likely, if it's federal, I think you're going to get 6 months, but most places are willing to work with you. It's just like the landlord's working with the tenant. The lenders are working with the mortgage holder. You'd also, for the landlord, it depends on whether you have staff. You might be looking at a paycheck protection program loan. The one thing with the federal loans right now is the paycheck protection program. We're able to get those through in about 3 to 4 days, and then you're able to get funded within 10 days. So the money's coming pretty quick. The EIDL loans, the economic injury disaster loans, it's a dumpster fire. They are still working on the last tranche before they pass the new the new law. So they're still looking at early April. We've had some people get their advances that were before April 15th, but for the most part, they're just working through that glut. They won't even take new loans, even though there's $60 billion sitting there for disbursement. So we don't know what the SBA is going to do. They got handed they just weren't prepared. There's no way for them to be prepared. They're doing more loans in 2 weeks than they had in the previous 15 years altogether. They're used to doing 60,000 loans a year, and they're being asked to do tens of millions. So it's dispersed through the lender for the PPP program, but it's the SBA itself that's doing the economic injury disaster loans, and they're just glutted. It's just horrible. So those are options, and then I would be contacting your lender. And there's always alternative lending too. If you have a consistent stream of income that's been coming off, there are folks that will loan you money on it.
All right. Well, fantastic. I think we've answered a lot of questions. I think you've given some great advice, especially from a legal standpoint. I hope I've given some good opinions of what I think we would do. But we're going to also be doing a replay. We'll send a replay to your email for Facebook. So everybody that's tuned in, we'll be doing this, replaying this again. Like I said, it's been an unbelievable conversation. I think we covered a lot of ground that people haven't really been talking about, but I know a lot of people are concerned with. And I can't thank everybody enough for tuning in. I know I've learned a lot of things myself. Toby, been great education. We can't thank you again for coming on, and we'll try and plan some more stuff down the road to give some great education for everybody.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay, well, everybody, have a great day, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye.